Look
Hey,
at that.
Kevin.
First try.
There we go. I was stalking you, making sure I could get on in time.
Yeah, sometimes I have issues with this and it like the requests get denied and stuff. I'm not
Oh, yeah.
exactly sure why. But okie dokie. We're already getting some people on here. How are
I'm
you doing today?
good. How are you?
Doing pretty good. It's been a long day. Mondays are exceptionally busy.
Same. But I feel like so we had the Boston Marathon and all that for today. So a lot of people near me, I live in Boston, are off. So I feel like everyone's like, oh, I'm going to send check-ins and extra questions and extra videos. I'm like, since like
That's
6:30 this morning.
Yep. That's how holidays are. That's how especially like the smaller holidays where no coach is obviously taking those off.
Yeah.
Probably.
Nope.
But everyone's like, oh, I'm just going to bug coach today.
Exactly. Now I'll catch up on the things I've missed the last few weeks.
Right. Cool. Well, we're getting some people on here so we can go ahead and kick it off. For those of you joining that maybe didn't see the post, we screwed up the date for one. I did. And secondly, we wanted to talk about a topic that you and I had talked about on our last call, and that was why the functional health space may be failing you in the sense that we're now that it's grown so much and more people are involved, we're seeing these people that are going, that are on their fourth coach, right? Their fourth attempt at a SIBO protocol, or their fourth attempt at, coming off birth control or getting their cycle back, or any number of things. And that's we're definitely seeing a trend now and I think we're going to keep seeing it, where these folks are going to keep getting just recycled and recycled and recycled.
I think that
So,
what you
go
kind
ahead.
of said right there, though, too, that we're seeing a trend is partly because it's becoming trendy in a sense that, it's sort of the hot topic right now
Yeah,
among the health and fitness industry too.
right. And that goes both ways. So it's hot in terms of if you're a coach, you want in on it, right? And if you're a athlete, you want to know if it will benefit you. And I think that we can talk about both of those things. I mean, as in the coaching space, it's a necessary tool at this
Yeah.
point. You need to be able to do these things. However, the I think that the mistakes people make are, just jumping into one class or Googling some things doesn't really give you the skill set. There's the human element and the application element takes more practice, right? And
Yes.
that's where things get tricky. And and then also there's the other group of people that are obviously just marketing their way into the space as a way to sell supplements or, you know, sell services, and it gotten kind of cookie cutter.
Hmm.
So there's problem on that side. And then on the client side of things, there's a lot of people, frankly, that are just identifying with issues that they probably maybe don't have or are making worse
Yep.
by victimizing themselves,
Yep. Absolutely. And then your brain just kind of spirals with it and makes it a lot more exacerbated than it actually is.
right? So it's, like I get people that come in and I'm always kind of careful now about how I say what I'm seeing on lab work, what I'm seeing with their intakes and stuff in terms of what I tell them, because I almost don't want people to feel like their case is that bad,
Mm.
and sometimes
Yep.
the cases are bad,
Yep.
right? But um, you have to be careful with that, because I think the coaches are coming in and maybe trying to hook people on the fact that they're like, oh, this person needs me because they're screwed up.
Hmm. Yeah, it's definitely taking advantage a little bit. I've seen that too, as far as people being vulnerable with situations that they're dealing with, and maybe they aren't so bad, but you kind of give them that they're getting from either the space in general or coaches or whatever, the feeling of urgency that may not necessarily need to be there too.
Right. Yeah. Or on the flip side of it, and this kind of goes back to what I said earlier, they are the person that has had two, three, four coaches that, in that functional space. And the question becomes like, why is this not working? Because at a point, I mean, I'm doing something a little different than you're doing something a little different than the other person. But in all reality, by the time we get up to the fourth coach, we have to start to wonder where the root of the problem is,
I
right?
think that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go
I was going to
ahead.
say it's something that you brought up that I felt was really, really good the last time we were talking about this, like off air, was maybe not necessarily starting in a typical spot that you would with everyone, and more so getting the client just to feel good after having been in the position that they've been with multiple coaches. They may have already formed some opinions, maybe even some negative thoughts and emotions towards certain applications of protocols and whatnot. And at that point, are just kind of like emotionally and mentally exhausted. And I think that it's really smart how you were saying that, you know, almost like doing something that you wouldn't necessarily feel would be the first plan of action, just to get that client to a point that they're feeling better overall in general.
Right. So I would say that this isn't always the case. You know, a lot of the time what's happening is the client has worked with another coach, they've gotten some relief, right? How much relief is going to kind of depend on the person. Some people do backtrack, don't get me wrong. Some people just will backtrack for a while before they finally accept what they need to do. But I generally find that people are kind of making a little bit of progression, and then they're like, I'm stuck, right? I can't seem to get over that hump. I can't seem to get that extra 50% improvement that I need. And what are they doing? They're trying to find an answer, right? And the answer lies in a protocol in their mind, right? The answer lies in like, I'm going to tell them, or you're going to tell them some kind of super groundbreaking protocol that they haven't seen yet. Maybe that's the case, but I find a lot of the time that, like you said, they're just burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
They've just been doing this over and over and over again, and maybe that last little bit of relief that we need is literally just to kind of get rid of most of that stuff and detach from this idea of I'm sick still.
That's huge.
Right?
That's huge.
Right? Like maybe you aren't that sick anymore, you know? And perhaps you are, but I find that a lot of people just aren't, or they aren't as sick as they think they
Mm-hmm.
are, right? When we start actually removing some of the things that are driving this sickness and this anxiety and this stress and all these things, and then at the very least I can do that and at least see like what's left over after that. You know, is there anything left over that I need to fix, or is it just gone?
Mm-hmm. No, I feel like that's very true. And like I can actually kind of speak upon that from like before when I was having functional issues and whatnot, that I started more the medical realm before I even came over to doing more like functional coaching and whatnot. I got tossed around from all these different rheumatologists and whatnot. And I started to feel like I was sick and like I wasn't going to be able to get better. And you start getting in your head about that instead of picking like somewhere small to at least be a starting point to do differently, as opposed to this like black hole that you allow yourself to kind of go down of all these things you need to do different.
Right. And there's another thing that I try to preach to people too. Once we get to a certain point of recovery from whatever the issue was, now I need to kind of flip the script, because what we're looking at the whole way is like symptom relief and these blood work and these biofeedback markers and all this. But then that becomes such a focus that they think they're going to be 100% perfect all the time. Nothing's ever going to be wrong, and that is a pipe dream.
Yeah.
Like, let's be honest.
Even for someone perfectly healthy.
Yeah, it's like it gets to the point where they like every time they burp and fart during the day, they think they have SIBO again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm like, okay, so now everything looks pretty good. We're most of the way there or all the way there. Let's change the connotation towards this feedback and maybe start like I said, taking some of this stuff away, not looking at the same things. Let's focus on like going back to improving physique, because I think that's where most people started anyhow.
Yep.
Right. And getting through this idea of you don't always have to take a million supplements. Maybe you don't need those anymore. Mm-hmm. Or you don't always need a protocol, or sometimes your blood glucose is going to fluctuate, or sometimes your heart rate's going to fluctuate, or once in a while you're going to have a bad night of sleep. Like, it's going to happen. So if you, because otherwise, like, they've gotten most of the healing out of the way. It's just now they're literally just a prisoner to this idea of perfection.
Yep, absolutely. I think too that especially people with gut issues, even when that can be like completely gone and healed, having something significant from like a trauma or emotional or a stress stance can cause like intermittent flares. And maybe they're
Sure.
95% of the way better, that every day is perfect, but things will arise. I've seen that with several clients actually that have had gut issues, gotten better, and then an event will happen.
Yeah, of course. And then I think getting people to understand, so like things I try to kind of sprinkle in along the way is like understanding context. Like, okay, well, and most of the time people report it right within their update. It'll be, man, my guts, I'm kind of bloated this morning. I didn't sleep very well last night. I'm like, okay, well, you answered your own question right in, it's there.
Yep.
Read it. So it's trying to get people to understand the context of it. But again, I just don't, it's amazing to me because I'll do that with people and try to build that awareness and understanding of like, why do these things happen? And it's totally a new thing to them, even though they've had 2 or 3 coaches prior. So I'm just wondering, like, what is going on out
Have you
there?
ever run into having a client that you helped get better, then go off for a while on their own and then come back with like the same issues, gone back to old habits and whatnot?
Yeah, and I think that it can happen a lot more if they don't stay on long enough after they're healed, because I think what kind of happens is it's almost, this might sound really drastic, but it's almost like it's almost like taking an addict out of recovery and integrating them back into society.
Yep.
Because, and I've gone through my own functional health issues and stuff. I'm like, okay, I fixed this. I had to do all these things to fix it. How do I go back and be normal without screwing it up again?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like what does that transition process look like? And I think sometimes people maybe just don't stay with the coach long enough, or the coach that they're with doesn't have a very good exit plan, or maybe they don't have that conversation. So yeah, it definitely happens.
I think that that's probably the biggest thing, is that the conversation doesn't really happen because people kind of get to the point that they're like, oh, I'm better, I'm done.
Right.
And that would be great, but
Yeah, and I mean, rightfully so, because I don't want people to have to deal with protocols and doing all this shit forever. It's
of
not.
course.
That's obviously not the goal, especially for a general population person that's not competing or doing anything. Like I want them. Like my goal is literally is like path of least resistance. How can they have as fulfilling a normal life as possible while still staying healthy and enjoying themselves? That's kind of the goal. It's not like, my goal is not to make them a slave to some insanely elaborate routine that is completely unrealistic to maintain.
I think that that's actually part of the stress that can even come with trying to do protocols and healing journeys and all of that too. Is almost like going from no data and application to way too much, and kind of finding that sweet spot too, depending on the person, that like how much can they handle without feeling overwhelmed, and then adding stress from a different perspective.
Do you find that people come in and maybe because now I think it's getting more common where they've had another coach, or they've watched some videos, some social media stuff, and they've done some research, right?
Yep.
So they have an idea that something's wrong. They maybe have an idea of even what is wrong potentially, and they want to come right in and kind of tell you, like, this is what's wrong with me. Give me the thing.
Give me
to
the
fix
protocol to make my life better. That's usually, I feel like, what people think is going to happen more so. And like, honestly, I learned this from my mentoring with you, is to like kind of hold people in just addressing lifestyle factors before even thinking about that, or blood work or whatever else, based off of symptoms, and keep them there from anywhere 8 to even 12 weeks, just to kind of nail all those before starting to do any type of protocols. Because half the time, especially for general population, from what I've seen, I think you can mitigate like 75% of it before even thinking about that.
Right. So if I don't need to do an elaborate protocol, how about I fix all these other things, whatever's left over we can address on the back end, and it's a much smoother path. But of course, now we can kind of connect that back to the coaching and marketing side, which is that's not sexy, and people don't want that because it sounds too simple, like it's not going to work.
Now let's go back to that for a second of like the marketing side of things and talk about your feelings on that a little bit.
All right. My feelings. Oh God.
And talk about, well, we were discussing this, how it's definitely become a little bit gimmicky of like titling things and making them sound all fancy and in kind of I want to say almost gives people like a place that they feel like they belong. Like, I have this, I coincide, I connect with this, and then are drawn to anything that's marketed towards it, or like the bells and whistles to feel like almost placement, I want to say. But it's very gimmicky, and as opposed to looking for the root of whatever the health complication is.
Right. And there's a really simple reason that this works, if from a marketing standpoint, is because people in the fitness space, especially the more extreme they are, competitors, the more extreme they get, the more they identify with things heavily, right? So now what has happened? They can no longer, or at least not right now, can identify with being a competitor because they aren't functioning, they're not able to prep, they're not able to build muscle, like whatever, right? Now they have something new, right?
Yep.
Now they have something new to post about on social media. Now they have something new to kind of like build their community around, like talk to all the other people that have these issues. They have something new for their team. They can collaborate with other people. They can feel included, like all of these things. So they latch onto it,
yep.
Right? Which it's a double-edged sword, because I think on one side, it's good that people feel like they're not alone in things, right? That is important. So I always make it known to people, like, hey, I work with these cases all the time. This is a kind of a common thing, because you just see there's a lot of similarities between cases, of course.
Mm-hmm.
This is a common thing. Like, we can work through it, blah, blah, blah. Maybe even like refer them to like a testimonial or another client
Mm-hmm.
that had success or whatever. But at the same time, it's almost like a clicky thing now. Like competing's a clicky thing. You know, that's why do you think you have teams of like 1 million bikini competitors where they just want to go just because it's a team, irregardless of the fact that 75% of the people on the team crash and burn and never hear from them again?
And that's
because
now.
Right. It's the same thing. Like it's happening in this space too. Is like the more sensationalistic it is, and the more people yell and scream and act like fools, like the more they want to be part of that team.
Yep.
You know. So, but like, what does that do? What does that do for anyone other than just continue to like build this like victim mentality towards their situation? I don't really see the benefit in it, other than the fact that they don't feel alone. I think that's important, but I think beyond that, they're missing the boat big time.
I agree with that. And I think that it can almost cause like conflicting paths to follow. Like, I've seen several people that are in need of functional assistance, and they're commenting on all of us that are coaching functional cases, and they're talking to all of us that are functional coaches. Little bits of this, little bits of that, but doesn't really want to commit to anyone, and kind of takes an overload from all of them, instead of just picking one person to shut everything else out, a path to follow, and someone to direct them. I feel like that's been really common.
100%. They come in, and this isn't just women either. Trust me, like I know a lot of people work with probably more female functional cases, but I have a lot of male functional cases now, and more all the time. And it's just as bad. But men are a little different in the sense that women have more issues with like the body composition side and things like that with the body image. And men do too, but I find men are way more hyper vigilant when it comes to tracking and when it comes to like variables. Men are way worse than women in my experience. women struggle more with the emotional roller coaster of body composition and the identity and the camaraderie and stuff like that. Whereas men, they kind of do stuff by themselves,
Mm-hmm.
but they get hyper focused and they come in and their list of supplements is like 43 pages long, and they've got like a 93-page assessment of themselves. Yeah. So so like as a coach, I look at that, and first I have to wonder, like, where did that come from? Thinking it came from one of two places. Either it came from them kind of doing what you're saying, right? Like
Taking bits and
picking from
pieces.
everywhere,
Yes.
or just like in an attempt to find something, or it came from a previous coaching experience. So I think that as a coach, you have to kind of figure out, like, where is this coming from? Because in any case, now I have to break this habit, right? Now I have to do one of two things. Either A, I have to kind of just pull the rug out right at the beginning and go back to ground zero, or I have to do it really slowly over time. But both ways are difficult, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And especially too, I mean, buying supplements that are like good quality and everything else is expensive. So I'm sure a lot of people are resistant just for the fact that they want to use what they paid for.
Yeah, sure. And they've done all these different testing and all this stuff, and of course, when we're looking at testing and data, yes, you're going to see that 25 things are wrong, but they're all really just, they've never really had someone just explain to them that this is why. These two things
Yep.
are why all this other stuff is wrong. Let's get rid of this and kind of focus on these two things, or this one thing, or whatever. And then we can simplify the process. And it's almost, it's kind of hard to get people to buy into that, because they almost think like I'm withholding something from them.
I think
No.
that's definitely an interesting mentality for people that are not educated in just like how bodily systems work and how interconnected everything is, because it's like, no, but this one area isn't working. That has nothing to do with anywhere else. And it's like your entire body is connected. The whole thing matters. And it's all connected to how one thing works to another.
Right. So you, again, like you have to kind of do this. One thing I've learned, and I think is a super valuable tool for anyone that's coaching functional health, or just coaching in general, is just having those conversations at the beginning of the coaching relationship, and just kind of making those things be known at the beginning, and trying to get as much of that abrasive, hard stuff out of the way right out of the gate. Because if not, it's going to be difficult to break habits, because, you know, otherwise people are always going to just kind of like want more and more and more and more from you, in terms of, I need something for this, and I need something for this, and I need something for this, when in reality, they don't, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that's another piece where this functional health space is just failing people. And I think most coaches have good intentions. It's just maybe that it's experience is part of it. Experience is a big part of it, because the more cases you work with, the more patterns, like psychologically and stuff, that you're going to see, and the easier you can kind of address things right out of the gate with people. But they don't, because it's sexier and easier to sell people if they've got some kind of really cool formula with a really cool name.
Yep.
So and more are popping up every day. Like every time I turn around, there's a new name for something.
Yep.
Like, but it's all the same stuff that's been happening. And great example right now. I've gotten asked about weight loss resistance about 50 times in the past 2 weeks.
There it is.
That's probably an exaggeration. But all of these folks have been having trouble losing weight. We know this, right? Like, it's not a mystery. We know that it's been happening, and we're learning more and more about why it's happening, and more about how to address it. But I don't know that giving everything a name is necessarily the best option either. for the reasons that we kind of talked about at the beginning, right? And I don't know, but I don't know what the solution is to that either.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with the weight loss resistance thing, and I've had a few clients even come to me and say, I've heard of this. Is this what's happening with me and whatnot? And it definitely gives them almost a sense of panic, as though like, this is now what's wrong with me, as opposed to like, well, actually, we need to work on, the fact that you're having insulin resistance. And this is how we go about that. We're reducing stress. We're pulling down carbs for a little bit. We're going to, here's the plan of how we do that, as opposed to just hearing this similar to whatever symptoms and whatnot they're having to now identify with.
Yeah. So it's an uphill battle that we're fighting right now, since this space is kind of blowing up the way that it is, which I'm really happy. I'm really, really happy that there's so much awareness around it. But I think that maybe a lot of people are looking in the wrong places, and maybe a lot of coaches are starting to implement these things for the wrong reasons. I mean, I know when I started to kind of like get these ideas about functional health, like, okay, digestion, this is important, and adrenals, like all this stuff. It was just because it made sense to me, and I'm feeling like, okay, well, these things are important in our results. Okay. It wasn't that, oh, cool, I can rope people in now and get all these extra clients and make all this extra money. Like, if you are good and you can solve problems, you will get business.
Mm-hmm.
You will get business. Like, it's not even a matter of if, it's just a matter of get your name out, produce results, continue to do it. You will be successful. But of course, people want to make money right now.
Yep.
Instead of tomorrow.
Yep. Unfortunately, coaching doesn't work like that. It's taken quite some time just to build up to where I feel like I'm at now, and still have a long way to go. So it's definitely not an instant thing for anybody.
Someone put a clown face in the comment. I don't know if they're calling me a clown or the other people a clown, but either way.
Uh-oh.
I don't know. Not sure. Probably maybe the other people. So another area that I think is lacking when we're talking about learning how to manage these cases are educating people more on the application and human element of this. So like a lot of people that have taken my classes and stuff or mentor with me, I haven't taken other people's classes. I'm just going based on feedback that I get from people and what they've told me. But I think that people need educated a little bit differently, in the sense that protocol is second to the human element, and learning how to talk to people, learning how to analyze people, learning where and when to apply. Like, I'm literally doing a live with Sarah Bishop soon about prerequisites of a gut protocol, like all the things before the thing.
Yep.
Right? So I think that it's more education needs to go into how to actually coach people.
Yeah.
Like actually coach a person. And that's where we kind of are, well, not kind of, we are really lacking in that area. And you may have other feedback based on that, because you probably have education from different places.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentored with you, I've mentored with Dylan, I've mentored with Jeff. And I think that understanding, and honestly, like, I had a lot of psych classes just in college, but the more interacting with people and the more like identifying trends and things like that has been kind of helpful for me. But I think that you have to know too what questions to ask people, because it's not just going to be what they're going to tell you on paper. Like, every single gut case I have now come into contact with has also had an underlying eating disorder in the past. And none of them ever tell you that on the consult or whatever else. And that was, Sarah and I just did a live on that last week. And I just find it interesting because, I mean, obviously we know that stress is a huge driver to a lot of these functional cases and problems, but for every single one to check that box is interesting. And then kind of having to reverse engineer, like, what is the mindset that is connected to this that's causing these people to go down these paths, and how do I get them to go the opposite direction, knowing that that's kind of how they think.
Yeah, because if you don't, what happens? You can run a protocol, whatever that might be, and you get some symptom relief, but you're ultimately just back to square one again.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to what you had said to me earlier about, do you find people coming back with the same issues? And yeah, if you don't do what you're saying, what you're talking about, they're going to get the same issues, and likely it's just going to be worse the second time and the third time. And it's like weight loss. I mean, the statistics on weight loss in general are pretty good, but the statistics on weight retention are really terrible.
Yep.
You know, on weight loss retention are really terrible. Why? Because they're not building in habits. You know, we're not addressing those things. So if we're not doing that upfront work with people, and we're not, coaching the human element, then what's other than being able to post like a real quick before and after, before they just crash out and burn on the other side and end up right back in the same spot, you really aren't doing anything for the person. Like, what my favorite thing is when I get someone that refers me clients that I worked with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Okay, I did something there. Like, these people, there's value that extended beyond our 2 years of coaching or whatever it was, right? But you can't learn that. You can't, for one, you can't learn, you're not going to learn that on Google. You're not going to learn that in a single class. But you can learn it by talking to the right people and paying attention to the right things. Like you said, learning about psychology, whether that's taking classes, research articles, anything that is going to be helpful. Paying attention to trends, write stuff down. Like, however you learn best, there's always trends. And basically all the concepts that you and I talk about, and I talk about with other people, it just comes from looking at trends,
Analyzing
keeping
data.
track. Yeah. That's where and then ultimately you can coach people and get results. Like I always say, like, what's the point of losing 15 pounds if you gain 20 back?
That's an interesting thing to think about too, because a lot of people that fail with weight loss retention is how they got to the weight loss goal in the first place. Like, did they do it drastically? Did they cut all types of food groups out? Was it over a short duration? And I think that we're going to start to see the same thing in the functional space too, because it was, you hear so much about like, well, just cut out all FODMAPs and pull carbs down super low and do a liquid diet, and poof, all of a sudden you're better. But what happens when you start to re-implement any type of food that bothered you before, or stress from training, or whatever else that, you totally mitigated for a short-term relief?
Yeah, it's I always say, like, the after is awesome, but I want to see the after, what's after the after. And then we're kind of on to something. If we can get results, we can sustain results. Of course, the path to get there might be different. It might be slower. It might be longer. It might be less sexy. It might be less cool, like whatever. But I ask people, like, well, I know you want to feel better. I want you to feel better, but I want you to feel better a year from now, 2 years from now. I want you to have habits built in and all these things. And if we're not doing that, I feel like we're failing people as a coach. Like, we're not really doing our job if we aren't sustaining results. And this is where it gets tricky, because on the other side of that, there is an element to instant gratification that's really beneficial, right? Like, if I can, like we talked about, sometimes one of the very first things we can do for people is just get them feeling better, mentally and physically. Anything that that's not a solution to the whole problem, but if there's things I can do right out of the gate where I can just get someone to feel 25% better, then buy-in to that process immediately shoots up, right? So sometimes there is protocol warranted right out of the gate, or sometimes it means zero protocol and getting rid of everything. But again, you have to understand where that happy medium lies, and that's hard. Like, that's not an easy skill to learn.
Would you say that you feel that you're now going more to pulling everything back just to like basic habits than you are to immediately going into protocol stuff with people?
I think it depends on where they're at and where they've come from. I think that more and more and more, it's probably going to get to the point where I am going to kind of have to pull stuff back, because we're going to get more of those recycled clients that are on their third coach or third protocol or whatever. And so I'm going to have to kind of reset and restart. And another reason for that too is because by the time you get to that point, I don't care how good you are, you have no idea what's doing what.
Yeah.
At that point.
Too many variables.
You don't know. You may think you're super smart, but you don't know. None of us know, because there's too many things moving in and out at that point. And so simplicity is a super useful tool if you can apply it, right? So there's that side, which I think most people probably. And then the other side of it is the occasional person that I think that has, by some miracle, done all the baseline things themselves, and they come in and I'm like, oh, thank you. And we could actually put those protocols to use with people. But it's just not most people. But again, but sometimes, like you and I talked about, you do kind of have to go against what you want to do with someone to give someone what they need. So sometimes, like, I know that I want to do XYZ, because that's what's going to fix it. But if I do XYZ, it's going to stress them out. It's not going to give me long-term results, whatever. So I may have to do something a little more drastic out of the beginning. And that's where stuff like that's where the ideas of like doing flushes and doing more extreme stuff out of the gate can be helpful in some cases, because it does make people feel better, and you do kind of reset that groundwork and give them a nice base to work from. So there's merit in all of that. Yeah. It's just not everybody, right?
I think duration too is a big factor in that. So like when you're implementing a flush or something, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, and then you're starting to titrate them back to more normalcy, as opposed to someone trying to keep that going and stay. I've run into that too with a client inquiring that says, well, I've been on an all liquid diet for the last 2 months. I'm like, what? How are you going by your every day to day and like not miserable?
Yeah, and you brought up a great point earlier in that I think what happens when they do that for too long, that's their life now.
Yeah.
They don't know anything different, and getting them to come out of that is going to be like pulling teeth. Like, it's going to be really difficult to get them to transition back into. So I try to put as much normalcy in people's diets or people's plans as I can, or sprinkle in phases where it's like, okay, well, I can tell that you're getting a little burnout. I can tell that you're really just not resonating well with what we're doing right now. So let's just kind of pull back for a week. Let's just go back. And I challenge people along the way. So maybe a challenge would be, we're not going to track anything this week. We're not going to look at the scale. We're not going to do most of the stuff we've been doing. I want you to like see what it feels like to not do those things. And I want to see what that reaction is from the person.
That's really interesting. I would have never thought of that with a client, but that's a really good idea.
And maybe it doesn't really serve the purpose of like getting them better physiologically, but what it does do
mentally
is it continuously, it either A, gives them a reset because it works really good and it relieves their stress, or B, they freak out and it's a really bad week. And I'm like, what does that tell me? That is a dead giveaway that this is largely psychologically driven, and now I can address that. Mm-hmm. Because some people are really good at tracking stuff and really good at biofeedback, and they live in that world, right? They'll do that. they'll do that stuff they'll do literally anything you say if it involves taking more supplements, tracking more variables, and being more neurotic. They're for it. They're ready. They're doing it, right? But if I take it away from them, I can learn a lot about someone in a week just by pulling stuff out of their routine.
Yeah, I would imagine a lot of competitors fall into that just because, being so type A and regimented and kind of used to that. And I could see that, especially competitors for females.
Yeah, and you learn about picking and choosing the things that are serving you and not serving you. I've gone through all this stuff myself. I'm the typical, especially in the past, typical type A, typical neurotic person. I lived in that space where I was anxious if I didn't track everything and blah, 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 like all that stuff. And I had to I'm like, all right, eventually I had to learn about things that were serving me and not serving me and start dwindling down that routine and reducing down that routine to what actually worked for me and what made sense for me, But that's a process that takes time. And if you're a coach that doesn't have a lot of experience, it's going to be hard for you to recognize those patterns. If all you were taught was protocols, then you're not going to know how to handle that. Because you're just going to think, oh, this protocol is not working. We should probably shift them into something else that's extreme. See if that works.
I feel like that's a really interesting point. And you had made that before too, is that, you can have a protocol that's like a way of going about fixing something, whether, you have SIBO or whatever it is. But if you don't know how to get through to the client emotionally, mentally, to get them to stay with you long enough to even get through one of those that are really aggressive, there's no way that that's going to be successful. What could you do?
Yeah.
To reduce the waste stuff. Reduce the waste?
Oh, someone asked a question.
Yeah.
Asking about their waist size. Well, if you don't have a digestive issue, then your waist size is probably body composition wise. I mean, if you're lean and your waist is still large, then you probably have a digestive issue. I would say it's probably safe to say.
Yeah, you're kind of talking about different ways of going about it. If you're looking to implement probiotics and then talking about portion control, those kind of do two different things.
Did we have another question? I think I missed one. Hang on a second. Let me scroll back up. I wasn't looking at the chat feed very well.
Just like emoji comments. I didn't see anything else that was like.
Yeah, I saw a couple clown emojis. I saw a sheep emoji.
Yeah.
So all of those things are definitely related. I don't know if they're saying I'm a sheep or someone else is a sheep, but either way, thank you.
You or me.
Shit. That's funny. No, I don't think we missed anything. Yeah, you guys can ask questions if you want.
I was going to say, I have one for you what do you think is more difficult, navigating a female with body image through functional health issues or navigating a male bodybuilder that now needs to come off of like all PEDs and whatnot?
Oh, man.
Match point.
Okay, so they're both going to present their own difficulties. I think that the biggest context point there is probably going to be like where are they at in their career journey, like how old are they, what have they done prior, and what is the outlook beyond that. So I'll give you an example. If they're young, then they're going to be difficult to work with in the sense that they don't really care about anything and they don't think anything bad can happen to them, mm-hmm. right? But on the plus side, if they're a young competitor, there's still a lot of chance that we can kind of fix these things and come back and work on them, right? But as far as like males to females, I don't know that there's one that's more difficult than the other. I think it really just depends on like how warped their perception of.
Well, it's kind of, I feel like in my mind, that would sort of be an even battle.
Yeah. Well, probably in males, I'll say this, probably in males, you're going to have more extremes just for the simple fact that a female, I'll give you an example, like a female bikini competitor, they've maybe been like lean before, but they can probably get healthy and maintain some kind of body composition that's not like pretty much just like an off-season bikini competitor. You could maintain that forever if you're healthy. But a 270-pound bodybuilder, that may never, ever be in the equation ever again. You know what I mean? So there's a difference between those extremes are a lot different.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep. It's just interesting to think of from an inherent stance.
Yeah, but I think that's a good question because I think a lot of people don't really think males or men when they think functional health. They don't think about, because men kind of make jokes out of it, you know, like they get digestive issues or they get fat in the off season, like all these things, and they just kind of make jokes out of it. Whereas women, they project it a little differently,
Yeah.
you know, for sure.
I really haven't experienced male functional health cases yet. That's why I've had solely women so far, but I'd like to.
Yeah, it's different. It's a lot of the same problems. You know, I mean, the only thing that really varies in male is they don't have a menstrual cycle. That's but all the other stuff, I think that GI issues super common in males. I just did a live about this. I think it was Friday, talking about that because males have a whole different set of issues. Like they eat more food, they're a lot bigger, they training with heavier weights generally. You know, there's more systemic stress in different areas for men. Even though their bodies may be more resilient, they're getting hit a lot harder.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, well, I remember you telling me when you had SIBO, you're like, yeah, I just pulled my food back about 50% and it cleared up. Like, oh, well, if I'm eating 7,000 calories, I think I'd have that same issue.
Right. Yeah. I'm actually getting ready to do that now. I'm kind of getting to the point where digestion's kind of getting a little funky sometimes, so I'm gonna probably just pull back and kind of reset things. But I've also done this enough, and I'm smart enough to know not to dig myself in a giant hole.
Well, you know, I'm sure too the like leading up signs to you are a lot more apparent.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, I don't really have much else to touch on there. If anyone else has questions, feel free to drop them in. That was a good discussion. You did get me to
you started rolling
go off a little bit there.
That was the goal.
I know you said you were going to.
That was the goal.
I'm always trying to behave.
The bear.
But you know I'm very opinionated.
Quietly, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm quietly opinionated.
Unlike Jeff.
Yes. But Jeff and I have a lot of the same opinions.
Yes.
He just says more than me.
Yes. That is for sure.
It's funny. Cool. Well, we'll cut it off there. I'll repost this and tag you and stuff so people can rewatch. Appreciate you for coming on, and thank you everybody for tuning in. If you guys want to rewatch, it'll be in our social media, and we will talk to you guys next time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.